In the ancient world, kings measured power with gold. Empires measured wealth with land. Merchants measured success with silver. But in the unseen world, the world the Bible hints at, but rarely fully, explains there may exist an entirely different system of value. A spiritual economy. A currency not made of metal. A currency not printed by any earthly authority. A currency that flows through heaven itself. And according to some of the deepest interpretations of Scripture, the guardians of that economy may be the mysterious beings known as the cherubim. Most people imagine cherubim as harmless baby angels painted on cathedral ceilings. But the biblical description could not be more different. Cherubim are not decorative. They are terrifying. They are powerful. They are guardians of divine authority. And in many ways, they appear to function as gatekeepers of something far more mysterious than most people realize. Something that could be described as spiritual currency. To understand this idea, we have to begin at the very beginning, back in the Garden of Eden. When humanity was expelled from paradise, the Scriptures tell us something very specific happened. God placed cherubim at the east of the garden, alongside a flaming sword that turned in every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. Notice something fascinating. The cherubim were not guarding the garden itself. They were guarding access to something inside the garden, the tree of life. Why would access to a single tree require such powerful celestial guardians? Unless that tree represented something more than just food. Unless it represented access to a kind of divine resource. A resource so valuable that heaven itself had to restrict it. In ancient cultures, access to divine resources was often described using economic language. Blessings were described as treasures. Wisdom was described as riches. Favor was described as inheritance. And throughout the Bible, we repeatedly see spiritual realities described as forms of wealth. But what if this language was not just metaphor? What if it reflected something real? A structure within the unseen world. A system of value. A heavenly economy. And what if the cherubim were the enforcers of that system? To explore this possibility, we must understand who the cherubim actually are. The prophet Ezekiel describes them in extraordinary detail. Each cherub has 4 faces, the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. Each face representing a dimension of power, intelligence, strength, authority, vision. Their bodies are covered in eyes. Their wings stretch across the throne of God. And beneath them are wheels within wheels, mysterious structures that move wherever the Spirit directs. This imagery is so complex that many scholars believe Ezekiel was struggling to describe something beyond human comprehension. But there is one detail that stands out above everything else. The cherubim are always associated with the throne. They are not messengers like angels. They are not warriors like archangels. They are throne guardians. They exist where divine authority is concentrated. And wherever authority exists, value is regulated. Think about earthly governments. At the center of every government is a treasury. At the center of every empire is control over resources. Gold, oil, land, trade routes. Now imagine heaven as a kingdom. If heaven operates like a kingdom, then it likely has something similar to a treasury. A system that governs how divine power flows through creation. And this is where the concept of spiritual currency begins to emerge. Throughout Scripture, certain things appear to generate spiritual value. Faith, righteousness, obedience, sacrifice, even worship. In the book of Revelation, we see prayers rising before God like incense, almost as if they are offerings placed into a heavenly account. Jesus himself once said something extremely interesting. Store up treasures in heaven. Treasures in heaven. That statement raises an obvious question. What exactly are those treasures? They cannot be gold. They cannot be jewels. Heaven does not need earthly wealth. So what kind of treasure could exist in heaven? Many theologians believe these treasures represent eternal rewards. But there may be a deeper layer. What if these treasures represent forms of spiritual energy, forms of divine value, units of influence within the heavenly system? Think about it. The Bible repeatedly speaks about crowns being given. Crowns of life, crowns of righteousness, crowns of glory. Why crowns? Because crowns symbolize authority. Authority is power. Power is currency. And in a kingdom, currency determines influence. Now consider the role of the cherubim. If they guard the throne, if they guard the tree of life, if they guard access to the divine presence, then they may also regulate access to this spiritual economy. In other words, the cherubim may function like cosmic treasury guardians. They ensure that the flow of divine power remains aligned with divine law. This idea may explain some of the strangest passages in the Bible. For example, when Lucifer fell, Lucifer is described in Ezekiel as the anointed cherub who covers. This means Lucifer himself was once a cherub, a guardian of the throne. But something happened. Scripture says corruption was found within him because of the abundance of his trading. Trading. That word is incredibly strange in a spiritual context. What exactly was Lucifer trading? Some scholars believe the word refers to slander or deception, but others believe it may hint at something deeper, a misuse of spiritual authority, a manipulation of heavenly value. If Lucifer once had access to the throne economy, then his fall may have involved a rebellion within that system, a cosmic financial crime, an attempt to redirect divine power away from God. And if that is true, then the cherubim who remain loyal may now serve an even more critical role. Guardians of the spiritual treasury, protectors of the flow of divine authority. This perspective also changes how we understand worship. Worship is not just singing. Worship is alignment. When humans worship, they align themselves with divine authority. That alignment may generate spiritual value, value that flows upward into the heavenly system. Think of it like resonance between heaven and earth. When millions of people pray, worship, or act in righteousness, something shifts in the unseen world. Scripture hints that heaven responds. Angels move. Miracles occur. Doors open. Could it be that these actions contribute to a kind of spiritual economy? And if so, who manages that system? The cherubim remain the most likely candidates, because throughout Scripture, they stand at every critical gateway. The Garden of Eden, the Ark of the Covenant, the throne room of heaven. In the tabernacle built by Moses, 2 golden cherubim sat on top of the ark. Their wings stretched toward each other, forming the mercy seat. And it was between those cherubim that God's presence would appear. Why place cherubim there? Because the ark represented the center of Israel's covenant with God. It was essentially the meeting point between heaven and earth. A sacred interface where divine authority intersected with human obedience. And once again, the cherubim guarded it. This pattern repeats again and again. Every time divine power is concentrated, cherubim appear guarding, watching, regulating, which leads to a fascinating possibility. The cherubim may not simply be guards. They may be administrators, managers of divine flow. In other words, they may oversee the circulation of spiritual currency throughout creation. If this is true, then every act of righteousness may contribute to the strengthening of heaven's influence. And every act of rebellion may weaken alignment with that system. This idea echoes concepts found in many ancient traditions, the universe running on moral balance. But the Bible frames that balance not as karma, but as covenant. Covenant creates relationship. Relationship creates authority. Authority generates power. Power becomes the currency of the kingdom. And the cherubim stand at the gates where that currency is protected. But there is one more layer to this mystery. In the final chapters of Revelation, the tree of life appears again, not in Eden, but in the New Jerusalem. And this time access to the tree is restored, meaning the restriction enforced by the cherubim will one day end. Humanity will once again have access to the divine source life, immortality, divine energy, or perhaps the ultimate form of spiritual wealth. This restoration suggests something incredible. The spiritual economy of heaven is not designed to exclude humanity forever. It is designed to prepare humanity for participation. One day, according to Scripture, believers will reign with Christ. Reign. That word implies authority. And authority implies participation in divine governance, which raises a breathtaking possibility. The cherubim may currently guard the spiritual treasury of heaven. But in the future, redeemed humanity may be invited into that system, not as outsiders, but as heirs, co-rulers, participants in the administration of divine power throughout creation. If that future is real, then everything we do now carries more weight than we realize. Every act of faith, every act of love, every act of obedience, they may be deposits into an eternal treasury, treasures in heaven. And somewhere beyond the veil of our visible world, the cherubim continue their silent watch, guardians of the throne, guardians of the tree, guardians of the divine economy that sustains the universe itself. The spiritual currency of heaven is not gold. It is not silver. It is alignment with the will of the Creator. And those who understand that truth may already be participating in the most powerful economy that exists, an economy where the greatest wealth is not possession, but transformation, where the richest souls are not those who accumulate power, but those who reflect divine authority. And above that system, the wings of the cherubim still stretch across the throne, watching, guarding, waiting for the day when heaven and earth become one again.